Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Jesu minus Herzens Freund, which translates to Jesus, sweetest, loved, and best. Fairly straightforward chorale. Not too much to write home about in this one. We're just going to hop right into the analysis. We have two flats in the key signature. We start on B flat major and we end on B flat major. So I reckon the overall tonality of this chorale is B flat. And after our tonic triad, we have a passing seventh in the bass, which takes us to G, B flat, G, and D. It's a 6-chord G minor, passing tones in the tenor and the melody here that kind of gives us a bit of a passing 2-chord. If we look at it, we have G, we have E flat, we have G, and we have, sorry, this is a C. We have G, we have C, we have G, and we have E flat. And remember, with these passing chords, the inversion doesn't really matter as much. So a 2-6-4, even though this is sort of a passing chord, it's incidental because of the voices that are being, or the voices that are moving rather. So we do have a passing 2-chord, and that takes us to D, D, F, and F. Kind of interesting how we've been seeing this voicing over the last couple of chorales in particular, but this could be some type of rootless triad. I think it's a 3-chord, but after our 3-chord we do have a passing seventh in the tenor and a passing tone in the melody, which does not result in us having really an analyzable chord. We have D, C, F, and E flat here. So 3 takes us to G, B flat, B flat, and D, which is G minor in root position. That's another 6-chord. 3 wants to go to 6, especially root position like that. And we have a passing seventh in the bass and a passing tone in the alto. Now this first cadence is a bit interesting. The first and the third cadence, they have a profile about them that makes them sort of analyzable in 2 ways. The first time I heard it, it sounded like a half cadence, and I think it has to do mostly with the fifth of the chord being in the melody, but I think all in all these are imperfect authentic cadences, and it has more to do with the fact that we see E natural like early in comparison to the chord. Now this isn't always the case in terms of the way that I hear it. Sometimes these E naturals are heard as secondary leading tones, or just not just chromatic tone choices and not pertinent to any type of key change. But here it feels kind of like we've modulated to the key of F the more that I listen to it, and sometimes that can be all that it takes for me to sort of change my mind from my original stance, which was the fact that this was a half cadence, but I'm not 100% certain. I think that either analysis is accurate in terms of taking a stance and articulating a point, but we're going to say that we've modulated to the key of F here. So G minor is now our 2-chord. We have our passing tones, and then we have E, B flat, G, and C, which is C7 over E. It's 5-6-5. A little passing tone here in the bass as well before we get C, A, F, and C. It's F major over C, which is 1-6-4, and then we have G, E. C is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it, which takes the chord and turns it into a 5-chord on the end of the beat. It's kind of interesting to see 1-6-4 and 5 subdivided like this. I can't say that I've seen that all too much, if at all, in Bach's sort of cadential vocabulary, but here we are seeing it, which is pretty interesting. Something that I didn't notice when I analyzed it before the video to have my notes for this video. But we cadence on 1, F, A, F, and C. Now if you don't think we've modulated, these E's are secondary leading tones. This would just be 5 of 5. This would be 5-6-4 going to 5 of 5 going to 5. And to me, if there's a lot of just dominant alternation like that, most likely you've modulated. Not always, but most of the time you will have modulated, in my opinion. After our imperfect authentic cadence, which is really in the grander scheme of the form sort of operating like a half cadence, because we are cadencing on the dominant, and that's just going to end up being our 5 chord in terms of B flat anyways. It's just being, flipped around and turned into the tonic. Briefly, but the phrase is going to end with a perfect authentic cadence. We move to our tonic here, B flat, F, and D. B flat major, passing 7th on the bass, and then we have G, B flat, E flat, and E flat, which is our 4 chord in first inversion, E flat major, passing tones in 4 of the voices. That typically means there's a sort of like a passing chord going on here. In this case, it's F, B flat, F, and D, which is like a passing 1-6-4 chord. I think this is pretty neat actually, because Bach is using this chord as a buffer in between 2 similarly functioning chords, which is something that Bach does with quite a bit of frequency. So we go from 4 to 2 here, E flat, B flat, G, and C, which is 2-6-5. We know that Bach loves 2-6-5 chords, especially in cadential situations. But this 1-6-4 chord separating 4 and 2, we don't always get that, right? It's not uncommon for Bach to go directly from 4 to 2, but sometimes we get a buffer in between similarly functioning chords, especially with dominant functioning chords like 7 going to 5. Not always, but often. So we have 2-6-5 here. That takes us to 5, F major, F, A, F, and C, which is our dominant. E flat, we have this sort of embellishment here where we have E flat, D, and E flat, all non-chord tones, E flat being the chordal 7th though, and B flat being an anticipation before we cadence on B flat, F, D, and B flat, tonic triad, root position. Next phrase is a little bit quirky. We have another phrase here that ends in sort of this ambivalent, imperfect, authentic cadence or half cadence, depending on how you hear it. In this case, it really does feel like an imperfect, authentic cadence with the naturalization of both E and B. That's like 2 layers deep, because Bach has moved 2 cycles away on the cycle of fifths or the cycle of fourths, depending on how you look at it, from B flat to C. But instead of modulating at a distance, he's modulating through F major. So we start the phrase off with F major, F, F, C, and A, which is our 5 chord, but with E natural being on the next beat, I think that's, or the and of the same beat even, I think we've probably moved to the key of F by this point, just my opinion. Neighbor tones in the outer voices here before we get F, C, F, and A, which is another root position tonic triad. We also have passing tones in the outer voices again before we get A, C, F, and C. It just takes our tonic triad and puts it in first inversion. No need to reiterate the Roman numeral in this case. We have a neighbor tone in the bass and a passing tone in the melody here before we get another another 1 chord, where we have A, C, F, and A. So we don't need to reanalyze it all there, same way that we didn't have to analyze on the second beat of this set of 4/8 notes. But afterwards we have C, C, F, and G. Very common to see 4/3 suspensions over dominant triads here, but I do think this is where we modulate to the key of C major, where 5 becomes 1. Kind of interesting that 5 becomes 1 2 places in this particular chorale, or this particular phrase. And yeah, this is what I've been calling a mid-phrase modulation, where the phrase does not end in the key that it modulated to at the beginning. So this right here, where we start in B flat and go to F, that would be a mid-phrase modulation, but here where we modulate to B flat and stay throughout, that wouldn't be, in terms of like the notes that I've been taking and the observations I've been making about the chorales. But here where we move to F and then we end in C major, that would be a mid-phrase modulation as well. But the fact that we see B natural on the next beat is a pretty clear indicator to me that we've modulated, as well as the fact that we typically see 4/3 suspensions over root position dominant triads in the middle of the phrase, and the fact that we have G here operating as a dominant makes me feel like we will have modulated. But when we have the fifth of the chord in the melody, that's typically a hallmark of the half cadence. And even though this is an imperfect authentic cadence, we are, I guess, thinking about C in terms of it being an overall dominant in terms of its function, despite being in the key. But yeah, we move to our 5 chord here, G major, G, B, D, and G. And we have a bit of a repetitive anticipation here where we're just repeating the same tone, and it's also functioning as an anticipation before we cadence on 1, C major, C, C, E, and G. Next phrase ends in the key of F major. We see B flat on the beat here, which makes me feel like C, again, with the fifth of the chord being in the melody, is sort of operating like the 5 of F, even though there's nothing really inherently F major-like about A major, which is the next chord here. I would say A major is more closely related to F in terms of things you could do with it than it is with C, because A is the dominant of the relative minor. But really, you know, it's there. It is a distant chord, all in all. But we do end with a perfect authentic cadence here in the key of F. 5 takes us to C sharp, A, E, and A. That is A major, like I just said, over C sharp. That's 5, 6, 5 of, sorry, not 5. 5 was on my mind when I was writing that. 5, 6, 5 of 6 with a passing 7th in the tenor. And that takes us not to 6. We have a secondary deceptive progression here. We actually go to B flat. The lower voices would lead us to believe that we were going to D minor, D, F, and D. But B flat means that instead of going to our tonic in terms of D minor, we are going to our 6th chord. So one of these secondary deceptive progressions that ends up manifesting in Bach's music is 5 of 6 going to 4. The other common one being 5 of 4 going to 2. So this would just be a roundabout way of saying 5 going to 6 in D minor terms. But this is not 4, it's 4, 6. Passing tone in actually both of the outer voices. Neither of them are passing. Oh no, the melody has a passing 7th. And now we're closing in on our cadence. We have, actually, let's see if this is an analyzable chord. We have C, we have F, we have D, and we have A, which actually coincidentally ends up being a 6-4-2 chord, which 4 going to 6, not the most common chord progression, but it's actually pretty interesting that this 6-4-2 chord ends up being something that we see in passing, because 6-4-2, by virtue of the fact that 4-2 chords typically resolve down by step, which this does, and the roots are typically a fifth apart going down, which these roots are. I think it's kind of fascinating that we see 4 go to 6-4-2 here on the end of the beat, just by what we expect the harmony to do from trends and just the way that the harmony operates. So we have B flat, F, D, and G, which is 2, 6, 5. So we see the 4-2 chord resolve the way we would expect, and it's only a byproduct of 2 voices moving, which is pretty interesting. 2, 6, 5 typically goes to 5, C, E, C, and G. An anticipation here in the melody as well, but that's a 5 chord like we would expect. And then we cadence on 1, F, A, C, and F, tonic triad, root position. And then we see kind of a similarly structured phrase here where we have, we start off with this secondary dominant, but it sort of points us in the direction of which key we're going. It's difficult to say exactly whether or not we've modulated by this point, because we sort of have a bit of a chromatic bass line here if you include this F, but I do hear this cadence as a half cadence in comparison to the first cadence that we hear, which I think would be sort of like the comparative phrase, because we do have the fifth of the chord of the melody, the chord's in root position, but we don't have E naturals. We have E flats pretty sternly here in the tenor, which makes me feel like we are in fact in the key of B flat rather than in the key of F. So just in the same sort of symmetrical fashion as the last phrase, I do think that this F is functioning like 5 in the key of B flat, because by the time we see the next chord, we have E flat somewhere in the mix. Not technically on the beat, but just there is definitely a comparison to be made in terms of how these phrases, this couple of phrases here, are related to one another. So we start off with F sharp, A, C, and D, which is D7 over F sharp. It's a 5-6-5 of 6 again, and we would expect this to go to some type of 6 chord, or maybe even a 4-6 chord, and that's sort of up for you to decide. I think it does go to a 6 chord. We do see a sort of a variation here where we have G, G, B flat, and D, but I think 4-6 is also viable in terms of what you could analyze this as, because this E flat here is just going in the opposite direction. So it's possible that this is the case. In fact, it's possible even that this D and this B flat are both accented non-chord tones. Actually, that wouldn't make much sense. This D would be part of the chord regardless, because that is, even if this were a 6-4-2 chord, D would be the root of the chord. But whether this is 4-6 or whether this is 6, it's largely negligible, because, you know, we have reason to believe it could be 4-6, but here, if we're analyzing what's happening on the beat, it is a 6 chord. So after 6, we go to A, F, C, and F. Large space between the alto and the soprano for those of you who keep track of that sort of thing. That's an F major chord in first inversion. And then we move to our tonic, B flat, F, and not E, but D. We have this accented non-chord tone or accented passing tone here, but we know that our tonic is being implied. And as we get ready for our cadence, we have B flat, E, G, and C. Kind of an interesting cadential chord. We would expect 2-6-5 here usually, but here we have 2-4-2, C minor 7 over B flat. We have some neighbor tones here, and the alto and the bass here before we get B flat, E flat, G, and C again, so we don't need to reanalyze there. But G is a chord tone, E flat is a chord tone, G is a chord tone, and C is a chord tone. That very briefly takes the chord and puts it in, what would that be, second inversion, but we get rid of the 7th, so that would be the figured bass there, and then we cadence on 5-6. So the chord, this is sort of like more of an enclosure than it is really an implication of like a new harmony. It's just interesting that the chord is entirely intact. The 2-4-2 chord really is sort of resolving down to A, and this G is more ornamental than anything else, because the 4-2 typically resolves down by step, and I think the bass is just very active here. But yeah, 4-2, the harmony changes to a 5-6 chord at the cadence. So here again, a 4-2 chord resolving the way that we would expect. Okay, penultimate phrase. We end in an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of G minor, but we start off in the key of B flat major. If anything, just for a couple of beats, we have B flat, D, F, and D. It's our tonic triad in root position, passing 7th in the bass, passing tone in the tenor before we get G, B flat, E flat, and E flat. Just 4-6, E flat major in root position. And I do think this is where we modulate. We have F here, and D here, along with that B flat. It's very possible that we don't modulate until the end of the beat. We have seen modulations happen on the end of the beat, or I've personally modulated modulations on the end of the beat, but it is less likely to happen than it is to modulate on the harmonic rhythm. But this is where I believe we move to the key of G minor, and this is now our 6th chord, first inversion. 4 turns into 6, and this passing chord right here is a bit of a 3 chord, like a B flat major. Doesn't really make a tremendous difference, but again, 6 going to 4, this idea of similarly functioning chords having a buffer in between them. We saw this with the passing 1-6-4 chord here. I think this 3 chord is really happening the exact same way, and in fact in B flat major terms this would be the exact progression that was happening too. It just so happens that in this case, the phrase turns into melodic minor here, which I think saying the modulation happens while we're in melodic minor in G terms is not as sensible of an analysis as saying we're modulating over a common chord here. But yes, so the 3-6-4 going to E, B flat, G, and C, which is C7 over E. It's not a secondary dominant, it is a harmonization of the melodic minor scale. It's 4-6-5, and 3 going to 4 is a very common chord progression in Bach. We then have F sharp, A, and C, which is, I guess with this D here, it could be 5-6-5, but here, because the D doesn't happen until the and of the beat, it's functioning more like an anticipation. Along with this B flat, it feels more incidental or coincidental that it's there than anything else. But this F sharp is spelling a root position 7 chord, F sharp diminished before we cadence on G minor, G, D, G, and B flat. Okay, taking the chorale out, last phrase ends in a perfect authentic cadence in the key of B flat, and we pretty much move to the key of B flat from the very beginning. We start off with C minor, C, C, G, and E flat. It's our 4 chord in the key of G. It also happens to be our 2 chord in the key of B flat. When we see, what is it? Sort of, I guess with the F natural along with the E flat, it feels more B flat major like than it does G minor like, I guess. But we have the passing 7th here in the bass and a neighbor tone in the melody before we get F major, A, C, F, and E flat, which is actually F7 over A, which is 5-6-5. And then F is a chord tone. F is also a chord tone, so we don't need to mark those. And then we expect this fragment of the progression to end on 1. B flat, C, F, and D. Bit of an interesting chord here. We have a 9/8 suspension happening here, but we know that our tonic is what's being implied. We see 9/8 suspensions a lot over root position tonic triads, just like how we see a lot of 4/3 suspensions over root position dominant chords. But we have a passing tone, a passing 7th in the melody, a neighbor tone in the a passing 7th in the bass, and a neighbor tone in the melody before we get G, B flat, and D, which is our 6th chord, G minor, passing 7th in the bass, non-chord tone here in the melody as well. A lot of pairing between the outer voices here in comparison to other vocal pairings for non-chord tones and whatnot. But after 6 we have E flat, G, B flat, and C, which is C minor 7 over E flat. 6 typically goes to 2 in this context. Bach loves 2-6-5 chords, especially in cadential contexts as well. And then we move to F major, F, A, and C. It's our 5 chord. E flat's a passing 7th here in the tenor, and we have an anticipation here in the melody before we cadence on B flat major, B flat, D, F, and B flat, which is our tonic. That's today's analysis. Really not too much to write home about. I'd say if this chorale did have a hallmark that gave it a unique sort of profile, I think it'd be here in the middle section where we have these 2 phrases that start off with 5/6 of a chord. In this case, they're 5/6 of 6, so there's definitely some symmetry going on, but the way that they close out the phrase, or the way that each phrase is ended, is interesting in terms of comparing the perfect authentic cadence to the half cadence. It's also interesting to see a cadence on a inverted 5 chord as well. It's more of a small detail, but not really a big one. We also see sort of these buffer chords here that separate similarly functioning chords like 4 and 2 and 6 and 4. It's typically chords that are a third apart like that. And we just see the passing chord sort of create like a little barrier that doesn't necessarily break the flow or anything. It just, from a harmonic standpoint, illustrates that there is some separation between chords that are largely similar in terms of their structure and their function. And I think it's cool that there's consistency in Bach when he does that, which is pretty neat. And other than that, very straightforward chorale. Some of the points where we modulate might be up for debate. There's a bit of a modulation zone in certain sections, but really not too much to write home about. It's a fairly straightforward chorale. There weren't too many chords in here that were up for debate in the first place. So I think I'm going to cap the video off on that thought. If you're interested in following me along on the journey to analyze all of Bach's chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. You can hit the notification icon and like the video if you enjoyed the content. Thank you so much for watching the video, and thank you so much for supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.